Michael, we're going to be covering Chapter 4 today of Phase 1. Now, the first part of Chapter 4, it describes a couple of things that have to do with Ontario, because we're studying Ontario. Ontario is the largest agricultural component in Canada. Now, it's actually the second largest in size after Quebec. So we also want to keep in mind that we've got 70% of Ontarians that live in the metropolitan area of the major cities. So you'll have people living in Milton, Georgetown, Brampton, Toronto. 70% live in the cities, and then 30% are your rural and farmer population. Now, for understanding of how many people own a home in Toronto or in Canada right now or in Ontario, our focus is always in Ontario when we do this study. So if you were going to meet 3 random people, most likely out of those 3 people, 2 of them would actually own their own home. Okay?
Okay.
So 2 people would own their own home out of 3. So 2 out of 3 is the ownership average, which is very high, very good, very strong, very positive. That helps us in a great capacity because it helps us understand that we need to study and be prepared for understanding what mortgage is required, what down payments are required when people want to buy a second home for investment if they already own one. So most likely their second property will be strictly an investment property. Now, we'll cover values. So first we'll talk about objective value, and if we talk about it in a real estate term, objective value is something that is tied to the cost of reproduction of an item. So if we take, for an example, we'll say, for example, your wallet. It's manufactured and it's reproduced for a cost of $15 in a factory in a third world country. Now, that is just the cost to reproduce it, and if we look at it from a real estate perspective, if a house is destroyed due to natural causes or even an accident, that home is replaced at a reproduction cost, which is also known as the objective value. So the cost to reproduce it, to remake it, to rebuild it from scratch with all of the same similar materials. Now, subjective value is something else. That's actually what we call like perceived value. So when we talk about something that's of a luxury product, so if we talk about, say, a Louis Vuitton purse, so that Louis Vuitton purse, for example, is selling in the store for $500 or $1,000, if that's what the case is there. Can you hear me clearly there?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. It's
great.
Good. Sorry, I'm just following.
And so if we look at the subjective value of that item, it does sell in the store for $900, but the objective value or the reproduction cost of it might only be $100 or $200 at that point. So it might not cost as much as we would think to reproduce it, but because people in their minds have given it that value, it's now perceived. So that refers to real estate when we look at areas like Leaside in Toronto, we look at Yorkville, we look at the quarters of downtown Toronto. A lot of them are extremely expensive because of where they're located and what they offer. Okay, so now before we go into the other value principles, I'm going to cover 2 more items, which is one is going to be value and exchange. Now that is known as the market value. That is where you'll most likely get that amount of money during that time that you're offering it in a freely open market. So if you were going to say offer 2 cell phones that you have that are used, the market is willing to sell or buy them for $400, that's going to be the market value of that commodity based on that information. Okay. Now when we look at something rather than that, if we look at the price that you've actually paid for it, that will be known as market price. So the second you exchange money, you take money out of your wallet and you're ready to pay with your credit card or your cash, that becomes the actual market price. Alrighty. And so now what we're going to do is look at a few value and uses before we go on. I'm going to actually just end this video at the 4-minute mark. I'm going to stop this video because we're going to just create a part 2. I just want to make sure this one's going to upload properly. So we can continue with the value principles right after this. So I'm going to stop.
Can I ask a question on the subject of subjective value?
Yeah.
Can I think of it as let's say it's my house here, and I'm thinking it's worth probably $60,000 more than what I can actually get for the value. That's a subjective view of value. Is that correct?
It would be a subjective value, but it has to be on some kind of basis. So let's say it's because you have a really big backyard or something that the other people on this whole street don't have. That could be part of your subjective value. You could also justify it, but because there's no actual cost associated with, like it didn't cost you extra to build it or add to it, or you have, you know, this open ground or an open park behind you that's never going to have construction on, or you're backing onto a green belt, you can add value based on something like that. That could also be a subjective value perception.
Okay.
Good. Okay.
Yep.
So I'm just going to stop this video just for a second. I just want to